So the next thing that I want to just remind on, again, this is all in the level 1 training, repeated in the level 2 training for easy access. The two things, four steps for changing patterns, and 4 elements of one Gong practice for success. Now, this is really relevant for the EPR process, the 4 steps for changing patterns. This 4-step for changing patterns information is directly from Ren Shui. This is not my stuff, so to speak. This is Ren Shui theory, but it is very, very relevant for managing emotions and for changing patterns and the EPR process. So there's 4 basic steps for changing our patterns. There has to be a recognition and a willingness. That means a recognition that there is a pattern and a willingness to change. We have to understand and identify. So we have to explore and look at what is going on and identify the different pieces of the puzzle, which is what we do through the EPR process. We have to face with courage, and it does take honesty and courage to look at our emotional patterning and our patterns of consciousness. I'm sure you've probably worked that out by now. And then we have to replace an old unhealthy pattern with a healthier, newer pattern. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Step 1, recognition and willingness. The first step in changing patterns of consciousness is to recognize that there are problems that need to be addressed and to have a willingness to make an effort to change. This first step is vital. Without willingness, there is no hope for any change. So that's a pretty strong line there. Without willingness, there is no hope for change. And this is so true. We cannot change something, especially something that is uncomfortable or difficult, unless we have a willingness to do so. And you wouldn't be in this program if you didn't have that willingness. So don't worry, you already have that willingness. But with willingness in its place, all the other steps become possible. Willingness can both be encouraged and cultivated, which means we can work on cultivating and growing our willingness to change. Step 2 is understanding and identifying problematic patterns, which means we need to be able to identify either from the 10 fundamental patterns, the 20 supplementary patterns, or naming our own patterns, because we all have our own patterns. So this refers to gaining a good background understanding of what patterns are and how to work on them. This understanding will help us identify our unhealthy patterns and see them clearly. The better the background understanding, the better we will be at identifying patterns and knowing where they've come from and how to work on them. This is the foundation for the following steps. Facing with courage. There are a few choices available when problematic patterns are identified. For example, we can choose to face them and work on them directly, or we can choose to delay this effort until we're ready, and we can also pretend the patterns don't exist and ignore them. It's also possible to choose to deny the patterns and hold other people responsible for the problems caused. In other words, to put the blame outside, to project, all that sort of thing, and consequently ask others to change. So in other words, it's not my fault, it's your fault, you need to change. The choice we make here determines the future of our lives. Only the first choice, facing them with courage, can lead to a better life, and the road ahead can then become broader and broader. So step 4 is changing by replacing. And this is where the actual work lies, the most crucial step. Change should follow the laws of life, especially the laws of health and growth. In other words, the new pattern should be more aligned with the laws of life than the old one. This work requires consistent and persistent effort. And this is very important. This is not something that happens overnight. This is months and years of consistent, persistent effort. When the new pattern becomes more established, the old pattern will lose its strength, and gradually the pattern is transformed. And the reason that happens is because it's all to do with our neural pathways in our brain and the fact that we have neuroplasticity, which means that when we atrophy an old neural pathway, and essentially patterns run along neural pathways in the brain, when we don't use that pathway anymore, just like we don't use a road for a long time and it starts to become covered over by grass and it's no longer a road anymore, when we atrophy our neural pathways and we grow new neural pathways, which are completely different pathways, then the old loses its strength and the new patterns take the place of the old. So then we come on to the 4 essential elements of One Gong practice, which can be applied to all One Gong practices, and we're here only really using it in reference to what we're doing in the emotional freedom training, but it can be applied here, is that there are 4 essential elements of life cultivation. Number 1, consistent and dedicated effort. As we mentioned before, we have to be consistent. We have to do it over and over again, repeatedly, with dedication, and that takes dedication and it takes effort. And so we have to be patient and not expect instant results and know that this is a lifetime endeavor. And anybody who's really seriously working on themselves and working on their personal development, they will know that eventually you get to realize, hey, this doesn't end. I used to think when I first started doing personal development that I was going to reach some place where I wouldn't have any problems anymore and I would be sorted. And well, we could say that maybe the first proper inklings of that might be self-realization. But even so, one still has to work on oneself, and this work just keeps carrying on. We keep having to walk up the ladders of the ladder of self-realization. It's a never-ending ladder, apparently, which is pretty mind-boggling, but we only have to worry about getting to the next big rung, which in the Ren Shui approach is self-realization or enlightenment. That is the first major stepping stone, and it is a huge stepping stone. And when we reach that stepping stone of enlightenment, then a lot of our patterns will have gone. They're not all completely gone. There will be memories and shadows of them and still work to be done. But from the perspective of the 10 fundamental patterns and 20 supplementary patterns and these unhealthy patterns of consciousness, they will be to a large extent gone. So we have to learn diligently and observe ourselves keenly. This is the second element here. Learn diligently and observe oneself keenly. Be upright and act out of good intention and kindness. So we have to learn. We have to make an effort to learn what we need to learn, such as tools like in this program or any of the Ren Shui One Gong methods. And we have to observe ourselves keenly. We have to constantly be observing, how am I reacting emotionally? What am I thinking? What are my reactions? What are my responses? What do I need to change? There's this constant observation, which initially, I remember, when I started to develop the witness consciousness or the observer consciousness, thinking, oh my goodness, this is such hard work. It's like there's 2 of me. There's the me doing my automatic stuff, and then there's the me observing what I'm doing. And this is really hard work. But that actually becomes less demanding, if you like, the more the witness consciousness is developed. And we have to be upright and act out of good intention and kindness. So we need to be honest and upright and acting from our best intentions as best as we can, remembering that we're not perfect yet. The third element is that we have to transform our patterns by becoming aware of them and working on them, which will uplift our consciousness and our Shen and move us towards our true self. And then the fourth element is helping ourselves and others, which is the overriding principle of Ren Shui, which of Ziju Ju Ren. We work on ourselves, which then allows us to help others, and that helps us to create a brighter life. So these 4 essential elements of One Gong play an important role in whether our practice will be successful in achieving the purposes of One Gong. And that practice could be any One Gong method, but it also could be the practice of transforming our emotions.